There are days I stand here at this old kitchen sink, staring at my weathered hands, remembering the day I washed little Emma's clothes, that pink blouse she loved so much, all stained with blood from her broken nose. My hands shook so bad I nearly dropped the soap bar right into the soapy water. The red just kept swirling around, like it was mocking me, reminding me of how I'd failed to protect her. You know, some stains come out easy with a little scrubbing and some elbow grease, others stick to your soul forever, no matter how hard you try to wash them away. I'm Margaret, but everyone around here calls me Maggie. I'm 72 years old and I've lived my whole life here in Cedar Falls, Tennessee, in this same little house with the creaky floorboards and the old oak tree out front. Been a widow for 10 years now, ever since my Harold passed from the cancer. I'm mother to one beautiful daughter named Sarah, who's got her daddy's stubborn streak, and grandmother to the most precious little girl in this whole wide world, my 6-year-old Emma. That child is my sunshine, my reason for getting up every morning. But today I need to tell you folks the hardest story of my life. The story about the day I found out my grandbaby was being hurt by the one person who should have protected her, and what I did to that man. What I did was brutal. Now let me tell you about our little family and how we got to this point. Cedar Falls is one of those small Tennessee towns where everybody knows everybody, where you can't go to the grocery store without running into at least 3 people you went to high school with. It's the kind of place where neighbors still bring casseroles when someone's sick, and Sunday church is as much about catching up on gossip as it is about praying. I've been living in this same house for 47 years now, the one Harold and I bought when Sarah was just a baby. It's got white siding that needs painting every few years, a front porch with 2 rocking chairs where Harold and I used to sit every evening, and a kitchen window that looks right out over the Hendersons' backyard. Harold was the best man I ever knew, worked at the lumber mill for 38 years, never missed a day unless he was too sick to stand. When the cancer took him, it felt like the whole town lost a piece of itself. Sarah grew up to be everything a mother could hope for, smart as a whip, got a nursing degree, works at the county hospital. She's got her daddy's green eyes and his generous heart, always putting everyone else before herself. That's probably how she ended up with Derek in the first place. She met him at a church barbecue about 8 years ago, and Lord help me, I should have seen the red flags from the start. Derek seemed charming enough on the surface, tall, handsome, said all the right things about wanting to take care of Sarah and give her the family she'd always dreamed of. But there was something about his smile that never quite reached his eyes, something about the way he'd grip Sarah's arm just a little too tight when he thought nobody was looking. Harold had been gone about 2 years by then, and I think Sarah was just lonely, ready to have someone to share her life with. They got married quick, maybe too quick, and Emma came along a year later. That little girl became the light of all our lives from the moment she drew her first breath. She's got Sarah's sweet disposition and these big brown eyes that seem to take in everything around her. Emma and we've always had a special bond. Sarah works long shifts at the hospital, sometimes 12 hours at a time, and Derek, well, he works construction when he feels like it, which isn't nearly often enough if you ask me. So Emma spends a lot of time here with me. We bake cookies together, read storybooks on the front porch, and she helps me tend to my little vegetable garden out back. She loves to pick the cherry tomatoes and eat them right off the vine, juice running down her chin, laughing like only a child can laugh. For the first few years of Emma's life, everything seemed normal enough on the surface. Derek wasn't the hardest worker, and he had a temper that flared up sometimes, but Sarah kept insisting he was a good man underneath it all, just stressed about finding steady work. I bit my tongue more times than I can count, because you don't interfere in your daughter's marriage unless you absolutely have to. But I watched. I'm always watching when it comes to my girls. I noticed how Emma would get quiet sometimes when Derek came to pick her up, how she'd cling to my leg a little longer than usual. I noticed how Sarah started making excuses for why she couldn't come to Sunday dinner, or why Emma couldn't spend the weekend with me. Little things that might not mean much to an outsider, but when you've been a mother and grandmother as long as I have, you develop instincts about these things. You learn to read the signs that something isn't right in your family, even when everyone's pretending everything's fine. You know, there's something they don't tell you about being a grandmother. It's this fierce, protective instinct that's even stronger than what you felt as a mother. When Sarah was growing up, I worried about the normal things: scraped knees, broken hearts, whether she'd make good choices. But with Emma, it's different. Maybe it's because I'm older now, maybe it's because I've seen more of what this world can do to innocent souls, but every fiber of my being is tuned to that child's well-being. I can tell when she's happy, when she's scared, when something's bothering her, just by the way she holds her little shoulders or how she looks at me with those big brown eyes. And for months before everything came to a head, I knew something was wrong. I just knew it in my bones. It started with little things that most people would brush off. Emma stopped chattering as much when she came to visit me. This is a child who used to talk my ear off about everything: the butterfly she saw in the garden, what she learned in kindergarten, the funny dream she had the night before. But slowly, she got quieter. She'd still smile and laugh with me, but there was something guarded about it, like she was holding something back. I'd catch her staring off into space sometimes, and when I'd ask what she was thinking about, she'd just shrug and say, "Nothing, Grandma." Then there were the physical things. A bruise on her arm that Sarah said came from falling off her bike. A cut on her lip that Derek claimed happened when she was running and tripped. Each incident had a reasonable explanation, but they seemed to be happening more and more often. I started keeping a mental catalog of every mark I saw on that child, every time she winced when I hugged her, every occasion when she seemed afraid to go home. The worst part was watching Sarah. My daughter is a nurse. For crying out loud, she's trained to spot signs of abuse in her patients. But when it's happening in your own home, when it's the man you sleep next to every night, it's like you develop a blind spot. Sarah started making excuses for Derek's behavior, explaining away his outbursts, justifying why Emma couldn't come visit as often. "Derek's been stressed about work," she'd say. "He just needs some space to decompress." Or "Emma's been acting up lately, and Derek's trying to establish some discipline." I wanted to shake my daughter, to make her see what was right in front of her face, but I also remembered what it was like to be a young wife, trying to make a marriage work, wanting so desperately to believe that the man you chose is good and decent. Harold and I had our rough patches too, though nothing like this. Every time I brought up my concerns, Sarah would get defensive, and I was terrified that if I pushed too hard, she'd cut me off completely. Then I'd lose access to Emma altogether, and who knows what might happen to her without me watching from the sidelines. So I stayed quiet longer than I should have. I told myself I was being an overprotective grandmother, that maybe I was seeing things that weren't there because I'd never really liked Derek to begin with. I prayed about it, asking God to show me the right path, to help me know when to speak up and when to stay silent. But deep down, in that place where a grandmother's intuition lives, I knew I was failing that little girl. I knew that my silence was allowing something terrible to continue, and that knowledge ate away at me every single day. The guilt was overwhelming: guilt for not trusting my instincts sooner, guilt for prioritizing my relationship with Sarah over Emma's safety, guilt for being too much of a coward to rock the boat when a child's well-being was at stake. It was a Tuesday afternoon in late September when everything changed. I remember it so clearly because I'd been making Emma's favorite snickerdoodle cookies, and the whole house smelled like cinnamon and sugar. Sarah was working a double shift at the hospital, and Derek was supposed to be watching Emma, but around 3 o'clock, I heard that familiar little knock on my front door. When I opened it, there was my grandbaby, but something was different. She wasn't bouncing on her toes like usual, wasn't calling out "Grandma" in that sing-song voice that always made my heart skip. Instead, she stood there quietly, her little backpack hanging off one shoulder, looking up at me with those big brown eyes that seemed older somehow. "Hi, honey," I said, kneeling down to her level. "Did Daddy bring you over?" She shook her head and whispered, "I walked." Now, we only lived 2 blocks apart, but Emma had never walked to my house alone before. She's only 6 years old, and while Cedar Falls is a safe town, it's not something Sarah or I would ever allow. You walked by yourself? I asked, trying to keep the alarm out of my voice. She nodded and stepped inside, and that's when I noticed she was favoring her left arm, holding it close to her body in a way that wasn't natural. Emma, baby, are you hurt? I asked, and she immediately shook her head too quickly, too emphatically. No, Grandma, I'm fine. Can we make cookies? But I could see the pain in her face, the way she winced when she tried to lift her arm to take off her backpack. I helped her with it, being extra gentle, and guided her to the kitchen table. Sit down here for a minute, sweetheart. Let Grandma take a look at you. That's when I saw them dark purple fingerprint bruises wrapped around her tiny upper arm, like someone had grabbed her and squeezed hard. My blood ran cold, but I forced myself to stay calm for her sake. Emma, honey, what happened to your arm? She looked down at her lap, her little hands fidgeting with the hem of her shirt. I fell, she whispered, but she wouldn't meet my eyes. You fell? How did you fall that would make marks like this? I kept my voice soft, gentle, even though inside I was screaming. She was quiet for so long I thought she might not answer at all. Then, in a voice so small I had to lean in to hear her, she said, Daddy got mad because I spilled my juice on his papers. My heart stopped. He got mad and then what happened, baby? He grabbed me really hard and shook me and said I was clumsy and stupid. The words came out in a rush, like she'd been holding them in for so long they just burst out of her. And when I started crying, he got madder and said if I told anyone, especially you or Mommy, that he would hurt Mommy too. He said it would be my fault if something bad happened to her. I felt like someone had punched me in the stomach. This sweet, innocent child had been carrying this terrible secret, protecting her mother, protecting all of us, by staying silent about her own pain. I wanted to scoop her up and hold her tight, but I was afraid of hurting her more. Instead, I knelt down beside her chair and took her good hand in both of mine. Emma, listen to me very carefully, I said, looking directly into her eyes. What Daddy did to you is wrong. It's not your fault, and it's not okay for anyone to hurt you, ever. And if something did happen to Mommy, that wouldn't be your fault either. Do you understand? She nodded, tears starting to spill down her cheeks. But he said, I don't care what he said, baby. He was lying to scare you. Grown-ups who hurt children always try to make them keep secrets, but this isn't the kind of secret you should have to keep. I gathered her into my arms then, being careful of her injured arm, and felt her little body shake with sobs. All those months of watching and wondering and second-guessing myself, and here was the proof I'd been dreading. My granddaughter was being abused by the man who was supposed to protect her, and she'd been suffering in silence because she was trying to protect her mother. In that moment, sitting in my kitchen with that broken little girl in my arms, something fundamental shifted inside me. The grandmother who worried about overstepping boundaries, who tried to respect her daughter's marriage, who believed in working within the system, that woman died. What rose up in her place was something fiercer, something that didn't give a damn about social niceties or proper procedures. Something that was going to make sure this never happened again. After Emma fell asleep on my couch that afternoon, curled up under my grandmother's quilt with her injured arm cradled against her chest, I sat in my kitchen and stared at the phone for what felt like hours. My mind was racing, going through every possible option, every choice I could make, and none of them felt right. The logical part of me, the part that had always followed rules and trusted in the system, said I should call the police immediately. That's what you're supposed to do when you discover child abuse, right? Call the authorities, let them handle it, trust that justice will be served. But as I sat there thinking about it, I realized how naive that sounded. I've lived in Cedar Falls for 72 years. I know Sheriff Morrison went to high school with his older brother, watched him grow up. He's a good man, but he's also overwhelmed, understated, and dealing with a county that stretches for miles with only a handful of deputies. Even if he believed Emma's story, even if he took it seriously, what then? They'd have to investigate. That means interviews, paperwork, court proceedings that could drag on for months or even years. And in the meantime, Emma would still be living in that house with Derek, still vulnerable, still afraid. The thought of her having to testify in court, having to relive her trauma in front of strangers, having to face Derek while he denied everything, it made me sick to my stomach. Then there was the question of evidence. Those bruises on her arm would fade in a week or two. Derek would deny everything, probably claim she got hurt playing or falling, just like he'd been doing all along. It would be his word against a 6-year-old's, and I've seen how these cases go. I've read the newspapers, watched the news. How many children fall through the cracks because there isn't enough concrete evidence? How many abusers walk free because they're charming and believable and know exactly what to say to make themselves look like the victim? My second option was talking to Sarah, really talking to her, laying out everything I suspected and what Emma had told me. Part of me felt like this was what I should do first. She's Emma's mother, she has the right to know what's happening to her child. But I also knew my daughter, knew how deep she was in denial about Derek's true nature. Sarah had invested 8 years of her life in this man, built a family with him, convinced herself that his problems were temporary, that his anger was just stress, that he would change if she just loved him enough. Women in abusive relationships don't leave easily, even when it's their own children being hurt. The statistics are heartbreaking. Many mothers choose their abusive partners over their children, sometimes because they're afraid, sometimes because they're so psychologically damaged they can't see clearly anymore. What if I told Sarah everything and she didn't believe me? What if she chose Derek's version of events over Emma's? What if she decided I was an interfering old woman trying to destroy her marriage? I could lose access to Emma completely, and then who would protect her? Derek could manipulate Sarah into cutting me out of their lives entirely, and Emma would be more isolated than ever. Or worse, what if Sarah did believe me but was too scared to leave? What if she confronted Derek and he escalated his violence? Men like Derek don't just accept being exposed quietly. They lash out, they punish everyone they blame for their problems. If Sarah tried to leave him or threatened to call the police, he might hurt both her and Emma far worse than he already had. I'd read enough news stories about domestic violence murders to know that the most dangerous time for a woman is when she tries to leave her abuser. The third option was the one that kept circling back in my mind, the one that felt both completely wrong and absolutely right at the same time. I could handle this myself. I could make Derek understand that touching Emma again would have consequences he couldn't imagine. Harold had been a gentle man, but he'd taught me how to shoot when we first moved to the house, said every woman living alone should know how to protect herself. His old shotgun was still in the bedroom closet, cleaned and oiled regularly out of habit. I knew Derek's routines, knew he went to Murphy's bar every Friday night, knew he drove home alone on that dark stretch of County Road 15. I knew where he worked, where he spent his time, how to find him when Sarah and Emma weren't around. The thought scared me and thrilled me in equal measure. For months, I'd felt helpless, watching my granddaughter suffer and not knowing how to stop it. But this would be taking action. This would be ensuring that Emma never had to live in fear again. At the same time, I knew what I was contemplating was illegal, dangerous, and could ruin everything. If I got caught, I'd go to prison, and then who would watch over Emma? If I didn't handle it just right, Derek might retaliate in ways I couldn't control. And there was the moral question that kept nagging at me: what kind of person was I becoming? I'd been raised in the church, taught to turn the other cheek, to trust in God's justice, to believe that vengeance belonged to the Lord. Was I prepared to become someone who solved problems with violence? Was I prepared to look at myself in the mirror every morning knowing what I'd done? But then I'd look over at Emma sleeping on my couch, see those bruises on her arm, remember the fear in her voice when she told me Derek's threats, and all my moral reservations seemed like luxuries I couldn't afford. This wasn't about vengeance or anger or proving a point. This was about protecting an innocent child who had no one else to protect her. This was about making sure that the monster who was hurting her understood that his actions had consequences. And honestly, deep down, I didn't trust the system to protect Emma the way she needed to be protected. I'd seen too much, lived too long, watched too many bad men slip through the cracks while good people followed rules that weren't designed for situations like this. By Thursday morning, I'd made up my mind. I couldn't sit around debating options while Emma continued to suffer, and I couldn't trust anyone else to handle this the way it needed to be handled. I was going to confront Derek myself, face to face, and make it crystal clear that laying another finger on my granddaughter would be the biggest mistake of his miserable life. I knew Sarah was working the day shift at the hospital, wouldn't be home until after 6, and Derek's construction crew was supposed to be finishing up a job on the other side of town. But Derek had a habit of knocking off early when the boss wasn't around, usually heading home by mid-afternoon to drink beer and watch television. I'd driven by their house enough times over the years to know his patterns. At 3:30 that afternoon, I saw his beat-up blue pickup truck in the driveway and knew it was time. I'd spent the morning getting ready, though I'm not sure what ready even means for a conversation like that. I put on my best church dress, the navy blue one with the pearl buttons that always made me feel more confident. I brushed my gray hair back into a neat bun and put on the lipstick Harold always said made me look distinguished. If I was going to confront my granddaughter's abuser, I was going to do it looking like the respectable woman I'd always been, not some crazy old lady making wild accusations. The walk to Sarah's house had never felt longer. 2 blocks that I'd traveled thousands of times over the years, but every step felt heavier than the last. I kept rehearsing what I was going to say, how I was going to handle it if Derek tried to lie or make excuses. I was going to be calm but firm, clear about what I knew and what I expected from him. Part of me hoped that confronting him directly would be enough, that the shame and fear of being exposed would make him stop hurting Emma. Maybe he'd even agree to get help, to admit he had a problem and work on changing. I knocked on the front door 3 times before Derek answered, and when he did, I could smell the beer on his breath even though it wasn't even 4 o'clock yet. He was wearing a stained white t-shirt and jeans that looked like he'd been wearing them for days, and his dark hair was greasy and uncombed. Everything about him looked exactly like what he was, a man who'd given up on himself and was taking his failures out on people smaller and weaker than him. "Oh," he said when he saw me, and I could tell he was trying to figure out why I was there. "Mrs. Williamson. Sarah's not home yet, she's still at work." "I know where my daughter is, Derek," I said, and I was proud that my voice stayed steady and strong. "I'm here to talk to you." He stepped back and let me in, probably because he couldn't think of a polite way to refuse, and I followed him into the living room that used to be so neat and pretty when Sarah first moved in. Now it was cluttered with empty beer bottles, dirty plates, and tools that Derek couldn't be bothered to put away. The whole place smelled like stale cigarettes and something sour that I didn't want to identify. "What can I do for you?" Derek asked, settling into his recliner and muting the television but not turning it off. He was trying to act casual, but I could see the wariness in his eyes. He knew this wasn't a social call. I sat down on the edge of the couch, the same couch where Emma usually curled up to watch cartoons, and got straight to the point. "I know what you've been doing to Emma," I said, watching his face carefully. "I know you've been hurting her, and I know you've been threatening her to keep quiet about it." For just a split second, Derek's mask slipped, and I saw something dark and ugly flash across his face. But then he recovered, putting on that fake, confused expression he'd probably perfected over the years. "I don't know what you're talking about, Mrs. Williamson," he said, shaking his head like I'd said something crazy. "Emma's fine. She's a little clumsy sometimes, kids that age always are, but I've never hurt her. I love that little girl like she's my own." "Don't you dare lie to me," I said, and my voice was harder now, sharp enough to cut glass. "I've seen the bruises, Derek. I've heard her cry in her sleep when she stays with me. And on Tuesday, she told me everything. She told me how you grabbed her arm, how you shook her, how you threatened to hurt Sarah if she told anyone. Derek's whole demeanor changed then. The fake confusion disappeared, replaced by something cold and calculating. He leaned forward in his chair, fixing me with a stare that was probably meant to intimidate me. "Look, old woman," he said, and his voice was low and dangerous. "I don't know what kind of stories that kid has been telling you, but children have vivid imaginations. They make things up, especially when they're looking for attention. Emma's been acting out lately, testing boundaries, and sometimes you have to be firm with kids or they'll walk all over you." "Firm?" I repeated, and I could feel my anger building like a wildfire in my chest. "You call grabbing a 6-year-old hard enough to leave bruises being firm? You call threatening a child into silence being firm?" "I call it discipline," Derek said, standing up now, using his height to try to intimidate me. "Something that kid doesn't get enough of. Sarah's too soft on her, and you spoil her rotten every chance you get. Maybe if someone had taught Emma some respect earlier, we wouldn't be having this conversation." The way he said it, like Emma was the problem, like a 6-year-old child was somehow responsible for an adult man's violence, made something snap inside me. I stood up too, not caring that he towered over me, not caring that I was alone in his house with no one to help me if things went wrong. "You listen to me very carefully, Derek," I said, pointing my finger at his chest. "If you ever, and I mean ever, lay another hand on that child, you will regret it for the rest of your life. I don't care what you think about discipline or respect or anything else. You will not touch her again." Derek laughed then, actually laughed, like I'd told him a funny joke. "Or what, Grandma? You'll call the sheriff? Go ahead. It's your word against mine, and I'm the child's legal guardian. You're just a bitter old woman who can't accept that she's not in control of her family anymore." He stepped closer to me, close enough that I could see the broken blood vessels in his eyes, smell the stale beer and cigarettes on his breath. "And if you try to poison Sarah against me with your lies, if you try to turn my wife against me, I'll make sure you never see Emma again. I'll convince Sarah that you're getting senile, that you're making up stories because you're jealous of our family. Who do you think she'll believe, her husband or her crazy mother-in-law?" That's when I knew that reasoning with Derek was impossible. He wasn't a man who'd made some mistakes and could be talked into changing. He was a predator who'd been carefully manipulating and isolating his victims, and he wasn't going to stop just because someone asked him nicely. If anything, my visit had made things worse. Now he knew that I knew, and he'd be more careful, more controlling, more dangerous. I left Derek's house that Thursday afternoon feeling like I'd just poked a sleeping rattlesnake. My hands were shaking so bad I could barely get my car keys in the ignition, and it wasn't from fear, it was from pure, unadulterated rage. The arrogance of that man, the way he'd laughed at me, the casual way he'd threatened to keep Emma away from me, it all burned in my chest like acid. But more than anything, I was terrified that I'd just made things worse for Emma. Derek now knew that someone was onto him, that his secret was out, and men like him don't respond well to being cornered. I drove home in a daze, my mind racing with possibilities, all of them bad. What if Derek took his anger out on Emma that night? What if he decided the safest thing to do was to move Sarah and Emma away from Cedar Falls, away from me? What if he convinced Sarah that I was losing my mind, making up stories, becoming one of those paranoid elderly people who see danger everywhere? By the time I pulled into my driveway, I'd worked myself into such a state that I nearly missed the phone ringing. It was Sarah, and the moment I heard her voice, I knew something was wrong. "Mom," she said, and she sounded tired, confused, maybe a little hurt. "I just got off the phone with Derek, and he told me about your visit today. He said you came over and accused him of some pretty terrible things." My heart sank. Of course Derek had called her immediately. Of course he'd gotten his version of events to her first, probably painting himself as the innocent victim of a crazy old woman's delusions. "Sarah, honey, I need to explain, Mom, what's going on?" "Derek said you think he's been hurting Emma, but that's impossible." "I mean, I know Derek has his faults, but he would never hurt a child. He loves Emma." I could hear the confusion in her voice, the desperate need to believe that her world wasn't falling apart. "Did you see Emma's arm on Tuesday? Those bruises?" "She fell off her bike, Mom. Kids get hurt, it happens all the time." Derek showed me where it happened, right there in the driveway where the concrete is uneven. The ease with which he'd created that lie probably took him all of 5 minutes to stage some evidence and get his story straight. "Sarah, she told me what really happened. She told me Derek grabbed her and shook her, that he threatened to hurt you if she told anyone." There was a long pause on the other end of the line, and when Sarah spoke again, her voice was strained. "Mom, Derek thinks you might be having some issues. He's worried about you, and honestly, so am I. This isn't like you, making accusations like this. Maybe you should talk to Dr. Henderson, just to make sure everything's okay." It was happening exactly like Derek had threatened. He was planting seeds of doubt about my mental state, making Sarah question my credibility. "I am not having issues, Sarah Elizabeth. I know what I saw, and I know what Emma told me. That child is being abused, and your husband is the one doing it. Stop it." Sarah's voice was sharp now, angry. "Just stop it, Mom. I can't listen to this anymore. Derek is my husband, Emma's stepfather, and he's a good man who's been nothing but patient with both of us. I don't know why you've decided to turn against him, but I won't let you destroy my family with these lies." "Sarah, no, Mom. I think it's best if you don't come around for a while. Give us some space, let things calm down. Maybe in a few weeks, when you've had time to think about this rationally, we can talk again." The line went dead, and I stood there in my kitchen holding the phone, feeling like my world had just collapsed. In the span of one afternoon, I'd lost access to both my daughter and my granddaughter. Derek had outmaneuvered me completely, and now Emma was more vulnerable than ever. Friday morning came and went without any word from Sarah. I called twice and got the answering machine both times. I drove by their house around noon and saw that Derek's truck was gone, but Sarah's car was in the driveway. I knocked on the door for 10 minutes, calling out that I just wanted to talk, that I was sorry for the misunderstanding, but no one answered. Either Sarah wasn't home, or she was inside ignoring me. By Saturday, I was going out of my mind with worry. I hadn't seen or heard from Emma in 4 days, the longest we'd gone without contact since she was born. I kept imagining Derek taking his anger out on her, punishing her for telling me the truth, maybe hurting her worse than before now that he knew someone was watching. I called the sheriff's office and asked to speak to Sheriff Morrison, thinking maybe it was time to make an official report, but he was out of town at a training conference and wouldn't be back until Wednesday. The deputy who answered the phone, some young kid I didn't recognize, took down my information and said someone would get back to me, but I could tell from his tone that he wasn't taking it seriously. Sunday morning, I went to church hoping to see Sarah and Emma there. We'd been going to Cedar Falls Baptist together every Sunday for as long as I could remember, and I thought maybe neutral ground might give us a chance to talk. But they weren't there, and when I asked Pastor Williams if he'd heard from them, he said Derek had called and told him they were dealing with a family situation and wouldn't be attending for a while. Even my own pastor was being fed Derek's version of events. After church, I drove by their house again, this time parking across the street and just watching. I felt like a stalker, but I was desperate for any sign that Emma was okay. Around 2 in the afternoon, I saw Sarah come out to get the mail. She looked tired, stressed, and when she noticed my car, she stood there for a long moment just staring at me. I rolled down my window and called out to her, but she shook her head and went back inside without saying a word. That night, I sat at my kitchen table with a legal pad and started making a list. Derek's work schedule, his habits, the places he went and when. If the legal system wouldn't protect Emma, if my own daughter wouldn't listen to reason, then I was going to have to take matters into my own hands. Harold's shotgun was still in the bedroom closet, and I spent an hour cleaning it and checking to make sure it still worked properly. I hadn't fired it in years, not since Harold used to take me target shooting behind the Hendersons' property, but muscle memory is a funny thing. My hands seemed to remember exactly how to hold it, how to load it, how to aim. Monday morning brought another phone call from Sarah, but this one was different. Her voice was tight, controlled, like she was reading from a script. "Mom, Derek and I have decided that it would be best if you didn't see Emma for a while. Not until you get some help for these episodes you've been having." Episodes? I nearly choked on the word. "Sarah, I am not having episodes. I am trying to protect your daughter from a man who is hurting her. Dr. Henderson has an opening Thursday afternoon. Derek made the appointment for you. We think you should go, talk to someone about these paranoid thoughts you've been having." Derek had thought of everything. He'd isolated Emma from me, turned my own daughter against me, and now he was trying to have me declared mentally unstable. It was a masterful manipulation, really, the kind of thing that takes practice. I wondered how many other people he'd destroyed over the years, how many other families he'd torn apart with his lies and threats. "I will not be going to that appointment, Sarah, because there is nothing wrong with my mind. But mark my words, if anything happens to Emma, if she gets hurt again while you're refusing to see what's right in front of your face, I will never forgive you. And neither will you." I hung up before she could respond, my hands shaking with a rage so pure it felt like electricity running through my veins. For 2 days, I didn't hear anything from anyone. No phone calls, no visits, no sign of Emma or Sarah. Derek's truck came and went from their driveway at normal times, Sarah left for work and came home, but Emma never appeared in their yard, never played outside where I could see her. It was like she'd disappeared completely, and the not knowing was driving me to the edge of sanity. Wednesday evening, I was standing at my kitchen window washing dishes when I saw something that made my blood run cold. Derek was in his backyard, and he was burning something in an old metal barrel they used for trash. But this wasn't regular garbage, these were clothes, small clothes, and I could see flashes of pink fabric that looked suspiciously like Emma's favorite blouse, the one she'd been wearing when she told me about the abuse. I watched him feed item after item into the flames, and with each piece that burned, I felt my last hopes for a reasonable solution going up in smoke. He was destroying evidence, eliminating any proof that Emma had been hurt. Without those clothes, without those stains, it would be even harder to prove what he'd done. And if he was destroying evidence, what else was he planning? Was he getting ready to hurt Emma worse? Was he preparing to move the family away where no one could monitor his behavior? That night, I made my final decision. The system had failed Emma. My daughter had failed Emma. The church, the community, everyone who should have protected an innocent child had let her down. But I wouldn't fail her. I might be 72 years old, but I was still strong enough to do what needed to be done. I spent Thursday morning doing research. I drove to Murphy's bar and parked outside, timing Derek's usual Friday night routine. I drove the route from the bar to his house 3 times, noting the dark stretches of road, the places where a person could wait unseen. I went to the hardware store and bought a flashlight, some rope, and a few other items I thought I might need. The clerk, Jimmy Patterson's boy, chatted with me about the weather while I paid, completely unaware that the sweet old lady buying supplies was planning to commit a crime that would change all our lives forever. Friday morning started like any other day, but by lunchtime, my whole world had shifted into something I barely recognized. I was sitting on my front porch with a cup of coffee, watching Mrs. Henderson hang laundry in her backyard and trying to work up the courage for what I was planning to do that night, when I heard a car door slam. I looked up to see Sarah's Honda pulling out of their driveway, probably heading to work for her afternoon shift. But something made me keep watching, some instinct that told me to pay attention. About 10 minutes later, I saw movement in their backyard. It was Emma, and she was running. Not the playful running of a child at play, but the desperate, panicked running of someone trying to get away from something terrible. She was heading straight for the gap in the fence that led to the alley behind our houses, the same route she'd taken Tuesday when she walked to my house alone. But this time was different. This time, Derek was chasing her. I could hear him shouting from my porch, his voice carrying across the 2 yards between us. "Get back here, you little brat. You think you can just walk away from me when I'm talking to you?" I set down my coffee cup and stood up, my heart hammering in my chest. Derek caught up to Emma just as she reached the fence, grabbing her by the back of her shirt and spinning her around. Even from that distance, I could see that something was terribly wrong with her face. "Please, Daddy, I'm sorry." I heard her cry out, her voice high and desperate. "I didn't mean to break it. It was an accident." "Accident?" Derek's voice was loud enough now that I could hear every word. "You broke my phone because you're careless and stupid, just like your mother. What happened next will be burned into my memory forever." Derek drew back his hand and hit Emma across the face so hard that she fell to the ground. The sound of that slap carried across both yards like a gunshot, and I watched my 6-year-old granddaughter crumple into the dirt like a broken doll. "Derek!" I shouted, not caring any more about staying hidden or keeping quiet. I was off my porch and running toward their yard before I even realized I was moving. "You get away from her right now." Derek looked up and saw me coming, and for just a moment, his face showed pure panic. He knew he'd gone too far, knew that this time he'd been caught red-handed with a witness. But then his expression hardened into something ugly and defiant. "Mind your own business, old woman," he called back. "This is my family, and I'll discipline my child however I see fit." I reached Emma and knelt down beside her, and what I saw made my blood turn to ice. Her left eye was already swelling shut, turning dark purple around the edges. Her nose was bleeding, possibly broken, and there were finger-shaped bruises on her throat where Derek had grabbed her. But worse than the physical injuries was the look in her eyes, a kind of empty, defeated expression that no child should ever have. "Emma, baby, it's okay," I whispered, gathering her into my arms as gently as I could. "Grandma's here now. You're safe." Derek was standing over us, his fists clenched, his face red with rage. "Put her down, Maggie. She's my responsibility, not yours." "Your responsibility?" I looked up at him, not caring that I was on my knees in the dirt, not caring that he was bigger and younger and stronger than me. "This is what you call taking responsibility? Beating a 6-year-old child unconscious?" "She broke my phone. Threw it right down the stairs because she was having a tantrum about not getting ice cream. Someone needs to teach her that actions have consequences. She's 6 years old, Derek. 6. And even if she had broken your phone on purpose, which I doubt, there is no excuse for this." I gestured to Emma's battered face. "Look at what you've done to her. Look at this innocent child and tell me this is normal discipline." Emma was clinging to me now, her little body shaking with sobs, blood from her nose staining my white blouse. "Grandma, make him stop," she whispered. "Please make him stop hurting me." That's when Derek made his biggest mistake. Instead of backing down, instead of showing even a shred of remorse for what he'd done, he doubled down. "Emma's a liar and a troublemaker, just like her grandmother. Always making up stories, always trying to get attention." That happened when she fell down the stairs after throwing my phone. "The bloody nose?" "Same fall. I never laid a hand on her." He was so confident in his lie, so certain that he could manipulate the situation like he always had before. But this time was different. This time, I'd seen it with my own eyes. This time, there was no doubt, no room for alternative explanations or benefit of the doubt. "I saw you hit her, Derek, I said, my voice deadly calm. I watched you slap her so hard she fell to the ground. There are no stairs in your backyard, and there's no way a fall could cause injuries like this. Prove it, Derek said, crossing his arms over his chest. It's your word against mine, and everyone in this town knows you've been having mental problems lately. Making up stories, seeing things that aren't there. Hell, even your own daughter thinks you're losing your mind. He was right, and we both knew it. Without video evidence or other witnesses, it would be his word against mine. And he'd already spent weeks laying the groundwork, convincing everyone that I was unstable, paranoid, not to be trusted. But as I knelt there in that backyard, holding my broken granddaughter in my arms, watching her abuser smirk at me with complete confidence that he'd get away with it again, something fundamental changed inside me. The woman who believed in working within the system, who trusted in justice and fairness and doing the right thing, that woman died. What took her place was something fiercer and more dangerous than Derek could possibly imagine. Something that didn't care about consequences or legalities or what other people might think. Something that would do absolutely anything to protect Emma, no matter the cost. I carried Emma into my house that afternoon, her small body limp against my chest, her breathing shallow and pained. Derek didn't try to stop me, probably because he realized that neighbors might have heard the commotion and he needed time to come up with a better story. As I settled Emma on my couch and gently cleaned the blood from her face, I could see the full extent of what he'd done to her. The swelling around her eye was getting worse by the minute, and when I carefully felt around her nose, she winced and cried out. It was definitely broken. But the physical injuries, as horrible as they were, weren't what scared me the most. It was the way Emma just lay there, staring at nothing, like something inside her had simply given up. She'd stopped crying, stopped talking, stopped responding when I spoke to her. It was like Derek had finally managed to break her spirit completely. Emma, honey, can you hear Grandma? I asked, stroking her hair gently. She nodded, but didn't look at me. We need to get you to a doctor, sweetheart. Your nose is hurt pretty bad. No, she whispered, so quietly I almost missed it. He said if I go to the doctor, he'll tell them I'm clumsy and they'll take me away from Mommy. He said they'll put me in a home with strangers who don't love me. Even beaten and broken, she was still protecting Derek because he'd convinced her that telling the truth would make things worse. The calculated cruelty of it made me sick to my stomach. How do you fight someone who's willing to terrorize a child into silence? How do you save someone who's been taught that being saved will only hurt them more? I was still trying to figure out what to do when I heard Sarah's car in the driveway. She was home early from work, probably because Derek had called her with some story about what happened. I watched through my front window as she hurried into their house, saw Derek come out to meet her, gesturing wildly as he explained his version of events. Even from that distance, I could see the way he positioned himself, the way he used his body language to appear concerned and confused rather than guilty. After about 10 minutes, Sarah came across the street to my house. I could see through the peephole that she'd been crying, but there was something else in her expression too, anger, maybe even rage. For a moment, I hoped that maybe she'd finally seen through Derek's lies, maybe she was coming to take Emma somewhere safe. But the moment I opened the door and saw her face up close, I knew that wasn't the case. Where is she? Sarah demanded, pushing past me into my living room. Where's Emma? She's on the couch, honey, but she's hurt pretty badly. Derek, I know what Derek told me, Sarah interrupted, moving toward Emma. He said she fell down the stairs, broke her nose, and you came over screaming accusations and threatening him. He said you picked her up and carried her over here without even asking. Sarah knelt down beside the couch and gasped when she saw Emma's face. The swelling had gotten worse, and the bruising had spread down her cheek in a pattern that clearly showed finger marks. Oh my God, baby, what happened to you? I fell, Emma whispered, not looking at her mother. I was being bad and I fell down the stairs. I watched Sarah's face as she processed what she was seeing, and I could tell she was struggling with the same doubts that had been plaguing her for months. The injuries were too severe, too specific to be explained by a simple fall. But accepting that would mean accepting that her husband was a monster, that she'd been living with a child abuser for years, that she'd failed to protect her own daughter. "Sarah," I said gently, "look at her face. Really look at it. Those are handprint bruises on her cheek. That's not what you get from falling downstairs. She could have hit the banister, or the wall, or," Sarah was grasping for any explanation that didn't involve facing the truth. "There are no stairs in your backyard, Sarah." I saw Derek hit her. I watched him slap her so hard she fell to the ground. "Stop it." Sarah stood up abruptly, her face flushed with anger. "Just stop it, Mom. I am so sick of you making these accusations." Derek explained everything. Emma was having a tantrum, she threw his phone down the stairs and broke it, and when she tried to run away from getting in trouble, she tripped and fell. "These things happen with children." "These things don't happen to children, Sarah. Children don't just randomly break their noses and get black eyes from tantrums. Maybe they do when their grandmother is filling their heads with lies and turning them against their parents," Sarah shot back. "Derek thinks you've been coaching Emma, teaching her to say these things about him. He thinks you're so desperate to break up our marriage that you're willing to use my daughter as a weapon." The accusation hit me like a physical blow. Derek had thought of everything, planned for every contingency. He'd turned my love for Emma into evidence of manipulation, twisted my concern into proof of mental instability. "Sarah Elizabeth, you know me better than that. You know I would never hurt Emma or use her for anything." "I thought I knew you, Mom, but the woman who's been making these crazy accusations, threatening my husband, trying to destroy my family, I don't know who that is." Sarah picked Emma up from the couch, being careful not to jostle her injured face. "We're going to the emergency room to get her checked out, and then we're going home. And I don't want you coming around anymore. I don't want you filling Emma's head with more lies. Sarah, please, just listen to me for 1 minute." "No, Mom. I've listened enough. Derek was right, you need professional help, and until you get it, I can't have you around my daughter." She carried Emma toward the door, and I followed them, desperate to make her understand. "Sarah, if you take her back to that house, he's going to hurt her again. Maybe worse this time. Is that what you want?" Sarah turned around at the door, her eyes blazing with fury. "What I want is for my mother to stop trying to destroy my family with paranoid delusions. What I want is for you to get help and leave us alone." She loaded Emma into her car and drove away, leaving me standing in my driveway feeling more helpless than I'd ever felt in my life. I went back inside and sat at my kitchen table, staring at the bloodstains on my white blouse and trying to figure out what to do next. Every option seemed impossible. The police wouldn't believe me without more evidence, and Derek had already poisoned that well by spreading rumors about my mental state. Sarah was completely under his influence, choosing to believe his lies rather than face the truth about what kind of man she'd married. And Emma was more trapped than ever, convinced that speaking up would only make things worse for everyone. That evening, I called the hospital and asked to speak to whoever was treating Emma. The nurse I talked to was professional but guarded, probably because Derek had warned them that there might be family members calling with false concerns. She told me that Emma had indeed suffered a broken nose and significant facial bruising, but that the injuries were consistent with a fall downstairs. The family had provided a clear explanation for what happened, and there were no signs of abuse. Derek had coached them perfectly, given them a story that medical professionals would accept. He'd probably been charming and concerned, playing the worried stepfather role to perfection. And Emma, terrified and traumatized, had backed up his story exactly like he'd taught her to do. Around 9 o'clock that night, I was sitting on my front porch when Derek came walking across the street. He moved slowly, casually, like he was just out for an evening stroll, but I could see the predatory confidence in his posture. He'd won another round, isolated Emma even further from anyone who might help her, and now he was coming to gloat. "Evening, Maggie," he said, stopping at the bottom of my porch steps. "Beautiful night, isn't it?" "What do you want, Derek?" "Just wanted to check on you, make sure you're doing okay after this afternoon. I know it must be hard, seeing Emma hurt like that, especially when you're having trouble understanding what really happened." "I know exactly what happened. I saw you hit her." Derek smiled, but it was the cold, calculating smile of a predator who knows he's untouchable. "See, that's what I'm talking about. Sarah's really worried about you, Maggie. These hallucinations you've been having, these false memories, they're getting worse. Maybe it's time to consider assisted living, somewhere with medical professionals who can help you with these episodes." "I am not having episodes, you son of a bitch." "Language, Maggie. That's not like you." Derek stepped closer to my porch, close enough that I could see the satisfaction in his eyes. "The thing is, everyone in this town has noticed the changes in you lately. The paranoid accusations, the confusion, the aggressive behavior. Even Pastor Williams is concerned. He mentioned to Sarah that you've seemed disoriented during services, talking to yourself, forgetting where you are." Every word was a carefully placed lie, designed to build a case for my incompetence. Derek had been planning this for months, maybe years, laying the groundwork to discredit me if I ever became a threat. And now, after today's incident, well, I think it's clear that you're a danger to yourself and others. Especially to Emma. The way you grabbed her, carried her off without permission, filled her head with more lies, Sarah's thinking it might be time for some kind of intervention. I felt the walls closing in around me, felt Derek's web of lies tightening like a noose. He'd thought of everything, planned for every contingency, and now he was executing his endgame. If he could have me declared mentally incompetent, he'd eliminate the last threat to his control over Emma completely. That night, after Derek left my porch with his smug threats still ringing in my ears, I sat in my darkened living room and made peace with what I was about to become. I'd spent 72 years being a good woman, a law-abiding woman, someone who believed in doing the right thing through proper channels. But proper channels had failed Emma. Good women had failed Emma. It was time to see what a bad woman could accomplish. I went to my bedroom closet and pulled out Harold's old shotgun, the same gun he'd taught me to use all those years ago when we first moved to this house. "Every woman should know how to protect what's hers," he'd said, and I'd never imagined that what I'd need to protect was my granddaughter's life. I loaded it carefully, my hand steady despite everything that had happened. Muscle memory guided me through the process, breaking the gun open, sliding the shells into the chambers, snapping it closed with that distinctive click that sounds like a door shutting on one life and opening on another. Friday nights, Derek went to Murphy's bar like clockwork. He'd nurse 3 or 4 beers while watching whatever game was on the television, then drive home along County Road 15, that dark stretch of blacktop that winds through farmland for about 3 miles before it reaches town. There's a spot about halfway, where the road curves around Old Miller's Pond, where the trees grow thick on both sides and there are no street lights. It's the kind of place where a person could wait unseen, where a conversation could happen without interruption. I knew Derek would be drunk when he left the bar, not falling down drunk, but drunk enough to slow his reflexes, drunk enough to make him careless. I'd watched him stumble to his truck enough Friday nights over the years to know his patterns. He usually left Murphy's around 11:30, which meant he'd hit that curve by Miller's Pond at 11:45. I was waiting for him by 11:15, parked behind a stand of oak trees with my headlights off and Harold's shotgun across my lap. The night was cold for September, and fog was starting to rise off the pond, giving everything a dreamlike quality that seemed appropriate for what was about to happen. I'd thought this moment would feel different, more dramatic somehow, but mostly I just felt tired. Tired of being afraid for Emma, tired of watching a monster destroy my family, tired of pretending that nice words and good intentions could stop someone like Derek. At exactly 11:46, I saw headlights coming around the curve, weaving slightly as Derek's blue pickup truck navigated the winding road. I waited until he was almost past my hiding spot, then pulled out behind him with my high beams on, flooding his cab with light. I could see him checking his rearview mirror, probably wondering who was behind him on this empty road so late at night. I followed him for about half a mile, staying close, making sure he knew I was there. When we reached the straightaway near the old Jameson farm, I pulled into the oncoming lane and started to pass him, but instead of going around, I matched his speed and rolled down my window. Derek looked over and saw me, and the expression on his face was almost comical, confusion, then recognition, then a kind of irritated amusement, like I was a mild annoyance rather than a threat. He rolled down his window too, probably planning to yell at me about dangerous driving or crazy old women who shouldn't be on the road this late. "Pull over, Derek," I called across the space between our vehicles. "We need to talk." "Are you out of your goddamn mind, Maggie?" he shouted back. "Get away from me before you get us both killed. Pull over now, or I'll run you off the road. I've got nothing left to lose, and you know it." Something in my voice must have convinced him that I wasn't bluffing, because he slowed down and pulled onto the shoulder. I parked behind him, blocking his truck with mine, and got out with Harold's shotgun visible in my hands. Derek climbed out of his truck too, swaying slightly, and I could smell the beer on him from 10 feet away. "What the hell do you think you're doing, old woman?" he demanded, but I could hear the uncertainty in his voice now. The confident predator from my front porch was gone, replaced by someone who was beginning to realize that he might have miscalculated. "I'm doing what I should have done months ago," I said, raising the shotgun so he could see it clearly. "I'm making sure you never hurt Emma again." Derek laughed, but it sounded forced, nervous. "You're going to threaten me with a gun? Jesus, Maggie, you really have lost your mind. You think you're some kind of tough guy now? You're a 72-year-old woman with a rusty old shotgun that probably doesn't even work." "It works just fine, Derek. Harold made sure of that before he died. He always said it was important to maintain your tools." I took a step closer, and Derek instinctively backed up against his truck. "The question is whether you're going to make me use it. You won't shoot me, Maggie. You're not a killer. You're just a scared old lady trying to act tough. You're right about one thing, I'm not a killer. I'm a grandmother. And do you know what the difference is?" Derek shook his head, his bravado starting to crack. "A killer takes lives. A grandmother protects them. And I will do whatever it takes to protect Emma, even if it means becoming something I never wanted to be." I let that sink in for a moment, watching Derek's face as he realized I wasn't going to back down this time. "Here's what's going to happen," I continued, my voice deadly calm. "You're going to listen very carefully, and then you're going to make a choice that will determine whether you drive home tonight or whether Sarah has to identify your body tomorrow morning." Derek tried to maintain his defiant posture, but I could see fear creeping into his eyes. "You can't be serious." "I have never been more serious about anything in my life. I watched you break that little girl's nose today. I saw you slap her so hard she fell to the ground. I listened to her beg you to stop hurting her, and I watched you threaten to hurt her more if she told anyone the truth. She fell down the— Shut up." The words came out like a whip crack, and Derek actually flinched. "I don't want to hear any more of your lies. I know what you are, Derek. You're a coward who beats children because they can't fight back. You're a manipulator who turns families against each other to hide your crimes. And you're a predator who threatens innocent children to keep them silent about your abuse." I took another step closer, close enough that the barrel of the shotgun was almost touching his chest. "But most importantly, you're someone who has hurt my granddaughter for the last time." Derek's composure finally cracked completely. "Please, Maggie, don't do this. I know you're upset, but we can work this out. I'll get help, I'll go to counseling, I'll never touch Emma again. You're right, you'll never touch Emma again. But not because you've suddenly developed a conscience. Because you're going to understand that if you ever lay another finger on that child, if you ever threaten her or hurt her or make her afraid, I will find you and I will finish what we started here tonight. I understand, Derek babbled, all his arrogance gone now. I'll leave town, I'll divorce Sarah, I'll disappear completely. Just don't, you're not leaving town, Derek. You're not divorcing Sarah. That would hurt Emma more than it would help her, and this isn't about revenge, it's about protection. I could see Derek struggling to understand what I wanted from him. Then what? You're going to become the perfect stepfather. You're going to love that little girl like she was your own flesh and blood. You're going to protect her and cherish her and never raise your voice to her again, let alone your hand. And every time you look at her, every time you even think about hurting her, you're going to remember this moment and remember that I'm watching. Derek nodded frantically, sweat pouring down his face despite the cool night air. But if you ever forget, if you ever think that enough time has passed or that I'm too old or too weak to follow through on this promise, I want you to remember something else. I pressed the barrel of the shotgun against his chest, just hard enough to leave an impression. I've already lost everything that matters to me except Emma. My daughter thinks I'm crazy, my community thinks I'm dangerous, and after tonight, I'll be a criminal. That means I have absolutely nothing left to lose, and nothing is more dangerous than a grandmother with nothing left to lose. The drive home from Miller's Pond that night was the longest 5 miles of my life. I kept checking my rearview mirror, expecting to see Derek's headlights following me, maybe with police cars behind him. But the road stayed empty, and when I pulled into my driveway, the only sound was the engine ticking as it cooled down. I sat in my car for a long time, Harold's shotgun still warm in my hands, trying to process what I'd just done. I'd threatened to kill a man. Worse than that, I'd meant it. If Derek had pushed me one step further, if he'd laughed at me or tried to take the gun away, I would have pulled that trigger without hesitation. The woman who'd gone to church every Sunday for 72 years, who'd never even gotten a speeding ticket, had just become someone capable of murder. The strangest part was that I didn't feel guilty. I felt relieved. For the first time in months, I knew that Emma was going to be safe when she went to sleep that night. Whatever else happened, whatever consequences I had to face, my granddaughter would wake up tomorrow morning without fear. Saturday came and went without any word from Derek or Sarah. I spent the day cleaning my house obsessively, scrubbing floors that didn't need scrubbing, organizing closets that were already organized, anything to keep my hands busy while my mind processed what I'd done. I kept expecting a knock on the door, police coming to arrest me, Sarah coming to confront me, someone coming to tell me that Derek had reported the incident. But no one came. Sunday morning, I got dressed for church like I had every week for as long as I could remember, but when it came time to leave, I couldn't make myself walk out the door. How could I sit in that pew and sing hymns about love and forgiveness when I'd spent Friday night threatening to kill a man? How could I take communion when my hands had held a loaded gun less than 48 hours earlier? Pastor Williams called that afternoon to check on me, said several people had noticed my absence and were concerned. I told him I was feeling under the weather, that I'd probably be back next week. It was the first of many lies I'd tell in the coming months, small deceptions designed to maintain the illusion that I was still the same woman I'd always been. Monday morning brought the first sign that my threat had worked. I was watering my garden when I heard voices from Sarah's backyard, Derek and Emma, but their conversation was completely different from anything I'd overheard before. "How about we build a treehouse, princess?" Derek was saying, his voice artificially cheerful but lacking any trace of the anger I was used to hearing. "Would you like that? We could make it pink, your favorite color." "Really?" Emma's voice was small, cautious, like she couldn't quite believe what she was hearing. "You want to build something with me?" "Of course I do, sweetheart. I want to do lots of things with you." Maybe we could go fishing this weekend, or I could teach you how to ride a bike without training wheels. I could hear the effort it was taking Derek to maintain this performance, the way he had to force enthusiasm into every word. But the important thing was that he was doing it. Emma was safe, at least for now. Over the following weeks, the change in Derek was remarkable and disturbing in equal measure. He became the model stepfather, patient, attentive, never raising his voice. When I watched from my window, I could see him helping Emma with her bicycle, pushing her on the swing set he'd installed in their backyard, reading to her on their front porch. To an outside observer, they looked like the perfect family. But I could see the fear underneath Derek's performance, the way his hands shook sometimes when he thought no one was watching, the way he'd glance toward my house whenever he was outside with Emma. He was terrified, constantly looking over his shoulder, knowing that I was always watching and that one mistake would bring consequences he couldn't imagine. The isolation was the hardest part for me to bear. Sarah still wasn't speaking to me, convinced that I was having some kind of mental breakdown. She'd drive past my house without looking, pick up Emma from school instead of letting her walk to my house like she used to. The whole town seemed to be whispering about poor Maggie Williamson, who'd lost her mind after Harold died and was making wild accusations about her son-in-law. Dr. Henderson called twice to ask if I wanted to schedule an appointment, probably at Derek's suggestion. I politely declined both times, but I could hear the concern in his voice. In his mind, I was a 72-year-old widow living alone, showing signs of paranoia and aggressive behavior. He probably thought medication could help me, or maybe it was time to consider assisted living. I stopped going to the grocery store during busy hours, tired of the way conversations would stop when I walked down the aisles, tired of the pitying looks from people who'd known me their whole lives. I ordered groceries for delivery instead, becoming more and more reclusive as the weeks passed. But every time I felt sorry for myself, every time I wondered if I'd made the right choice, I'd look out my window and see Emma playing safely in her backyard, laughing and running around like a normal 6-year-old should. The bruises had healed, the fear had left her eyes, and she was starting to trust Derek's new behavior enough to interact with him without flinching. That was worth any price I had to pay. The months that followed were the loneliest of my life. Fall turned to winter, and winter dragged into spring, and I became a ghost in my own town. People who'd known me for decades would cross the street when they saw me coming, not out of fear, but out of that particular kind of discomfort that comes from not knowing what to say to someone who supposedly lost their mind. The mailman still nodded politely when he dropped off my letters, but the warmth that had been there for 20 years was gone. Mrs. Henderson still hung her laundry in the backyard next door, but she stopped waving when she saw me at my kitchen window. Even Pastor Williams, who'd always made a point of visiting his parishioners regularly, only came by once more after that first phone call, and his visit was awkward and brief. I could see the way he looked at me, like he was trying to figure out if I was dangerous or just sad, and I realized that Derek's campaign to discredit me had been more successful than I'd imagined. The hardest part was watching Emma grow up from a distance. She started first grade that fall, and I'd position myself by my front window every morning at 8:15 to watch her walk to the school bus. She'd gotten taller over the summer, lost some of that baby softness in her face, and her confidence was slowly returning. Sometimes she'd look toward my house as she waited for the bus, and I'd wave from behind the curtain, but she never waved back. Derek had probably told her that Grandma was sick, that it was better not to encourage my episodes. By Christmas, Sarah had completely cut off all contact. No phone calls, no visits, no holiday cards. It was like I'd died but was still alive to experience my own funeral. I drove by their house on Christmas morning and saw Derek's truck in the driveway alongside several cars I didn't recognize, probably his family, people who'd never heard the stories about crazy Grandma Maggie. Through the front window, I could see the warm glow of Christmas lights and the shadow of people moving around inside, celebrating without me. I sat in my car for 20 minutes, watching my granddaughter's Christmas morning happen without me, before I drove home and spent the day alone with a frozen dinner and old Christmas movies on television. The isolation did strange things to my mind. I started talking to Harold's picture more often, having full conversations with him about what I'd done and whether he'd be proud or ashamed. I'd catch myself setting 2 plates at dinner sometimes, forgetting for just a moment that I was the only one in the house. I began keeping a journal, partly to have someone to talk to, partly because I was afraid that Derek might be right about my mental state. Maybe threatening someone with a shotgun was the first sign of something worse coming. But when I read back over my entries, my handwriting was steady, my thoughts were clear, and my reasons for doing what I'd done still made perfect sense. The hardest test came in March, almost 6 months after that night at Miller's Pond. I was at the post office picking up a package when I overheard 2 women talking about Sarah and Derek. "Such a wonderful father," one of them was saying. "You should see him with little Emma at the park, so patient and loving. Sarah's lucky to have found someone who cares so much about her daughter." "I always thought he was a bit rough around the edges," the other woman replied, "but people can change, especially when they become parents. Emma seems so happy these days, so much more confident than she was last year." I stood there listening to them praise the man I knew was a monster, talking about how he'd transformed into this ideal stepfather, and I felt a twisted kind of pride. They were right, Emma did seem happier, more confident. She was thriving because Derek was too terrified to hurt her anymore. But hearing people give him credit for being a good man, watching him receive praise for the very behavior I'd forced on him, was almost unbearable. I wanted to scream at those women, to tell them the truth about what Derek really was and what I'd had to do to protect my granddaughter. But that was a luxury I could never afford. The truth would destroy everything. Derek would go to prison, Sarah would lose her husband, Emma would lose her home, and I'd lose the only thing that made my sacrifice worthwhile, the knowledge that Emma was safe. So I bit my tongue and listened to them praise Derek's patience and kindness, knowing that every gentle word he spoke to Emma, every careful gesture, every moment of safety she experienced was because of what I'd done in the darkness by Miller's Pond. Spring brought new routines. I started taking evening walks, partly for exercise, partly because it was the only time I could move through town without attracting attention. I'd walk past the elementary school and imagine Emma in her classroom, past the park where Derek now took her to play, past the church where my family worshipped without me. These walks became a kind of pilgrimage, a way of staying connected to the life I'd given up to protect Emma. Sometimes I'd see other families, mothers pushing strollers, fathers teaching their children to ride bikes, grandparents reading stories on park benches, and I'd feel a stab of grief for all the moments I was missing with Emma. But then I'd remember what Derek had been doing to her before I intervened, and I'd know that missing her childhood was a small price to pay for ensuring she had a childhood to miss. It was a Tuesday afternoon in late April, almost exactly 2 years after that night at Miller's Pond, when everything changed again. I was in my garden, planting tomatoes, and trying to decide whether it was worth the effort since I was the only one who'd be eating them, when I heard a small voice call out from the fence line. "Grandma Maggie?" The voice was older now, more confident, but I'd have recognized it anywhere. I looked up to see Emma standing at the gap in the fence where she used to escape to my house when Derek hurt her. She was 8 now, taller and more grown-up looking, wearing a yellow dress I'd never seen before and carrying a piece of paper in her small hands. "Emma, sweetheart," I said, my voice catching in my throat. It had been 2 years since we'd spoken, 2 years since I'd heard her call me Grandma. "What are you doing here, honey?" She looked around nervously, making sure no one could see her, then slipped through the fence and ran to where I was kneeling in the dirt. Without hesitation, she threw her arms around my neck and hugged me so tight I could barely breathe. "I missed you so much, Grandma," she whispered against my ear. "I missed you every single day." I held her close, feeling her warm little body against mine, smelling the strawberry shampoo in her hair, and for a moment I forgot about everything else, the isolation, the loneliness, the terrible choice I'd made. She was here, she was safe, and she still loved me, I missed you too, baby girl, I managed to say around the lump in my throat. More than you could ever know. Emma pulled back and looked at me with those big brown eyes that had always been able to see straight into my soul. Grandma, I need to tell you something important. I need to say thank you. Thank you? For what, sweetheart? She held up the piece of paper she'd been carrying, and I could see it was a drawing, stick figures of a little girl and an older woman holding hands under a rainbow. I drew this for you at school. Mrs. Patterson asked us to draw a picture of our hero, someone who protected us or made us feel safe. I drew you. My heart nearly broke looking at that simple drawing, seeing myself through Emma's eyes not as the crazy old woman the town thought I was, but as someone who'd protected her. Emma, how did you know? You were so young when all that happened. I wasn't as young as everyone thought, Grandma. I remembered things. I remembered how scared I used to be all the time, how Derek used to hurt me when Mommy wasn't home. And I remembered that after you came to talk to him that day, after you yelled at him in the backyard, he never hurt me again. She sat down in the dirt beside me, not caring about her pretty yellow dress. For a long time, I didn't understand why you stopped coming to see me. Mommy and Derek said you were sick, that you had problems in your brain that made you confused about things. But I never forgot how safe you made me feel, and I never stopped loving you. I reached out and touched her face gently, the same face that had been so bruised and broken that awful day 2 years ago. Now it was healthy and bright, full of the light that every child should have. You're so smart, Emma. So much smarter than any 8-year-old should have to be. Derek's different now, she continued, picking at the grass beside my tomato plants. He's nice to me, helps me with my homework, takes me places. But sometimes I see him looking at you through the window, and he gets this scared look on his face. And sometimes when we're playing together, it feels like he's pretending, like he's acting in a play or something. The fact that Emma could sense Derek's fear, that she understood on some level that his transformation wasn't genuine, both impressed and saddened me. No child should have to be that perceptive about adult emotions, that aware of the undercurrents of danger in their own home. Is he still nice to you, though? He doesn't hurt you anymore? No, Grandma, he never hurts me now. Never even yells at me. And when other kids ask me about my stepdad, I tell them he's great, because he is great to me now. But I know it's because of you somehow. I don't understand exactly what you did, but I know you made him stop. Emma stood up and brushed the dirt off her dress, then leaned down to kiss my cheek. I have to go now, before someone notices I'm gone. But I wanted you to know that I remember everything, and I understand that you saved me. Whatever people say about you, whatever stories they tell, I know the truth. You're my hero, Grandma Maggie. She started to run back toward the fence, then turned around one more time. And Grandma? I love you more than all the stars in the sky, just like you used to tell me when I was little. I watched her slip back through the fence and disappear into her own backyard, leaving me kneeling in my garden with tears streaming down my face and her drawing clutched against my chest. For 2 years, I'd wondered if what I'd done was worth the price I'd paid. I'd wondered if Emma would grow up thinking I'd abandoned her, if she'd believe the stories about my mental illness, if she'd forget how much I loved her. But in that moment, holding her picture and feeling the warmth of her hug still lingering on my skin, I knew that every lonely day, every whispered conversation, every moment of isolation had been worth it. Emma was safe, Emma was loved, and Emma knew that her grandmother had fought for her when no one else would. That was enough. That was everything. 5 years have passed since that afternoon when Emma came to see me in the garden, and I'm back where this story started, standing at my kitchen sink, washing dishes, and looking out the window at the life that continues without me. But everything's different now. The hands doing the washing are steadier, more sure of themselves. The woman looking back at me from the reflection in the window glass has made peace with what she became that night at Miller's Pond. Emma is 13 now, a beautiful young woman with her mother's gentle heart and a strength that I like to think comes from knowing she's loved unconditionally. I watch her sometimes from my kitchen window as she gets ready for school, and I can see the confidence in the way she carries herself, the easy laugh that comes when Derek says something funny at breakfast. She's never been hurt again, never been afraid in her own home, never had to carry the weight of adult secrets on her small shoulders. Derek kept his word, though I know it hasn't been easy for him. I see the effort it takes sometimes, the way he has to consciously choose patience over anger, kindness over cruelty. But he's done it, day after day, year after year, and somewhere along the way, I think the act became reality. Maybe threatening someone into being a good parent isn't the ideal way to create a family, but the result is the same. Emma has grown up safe and loved. Sarah and I have never reconciled, and I've made my peace with that too. She still believes I had some kind of breakdown, that Derek was innocent of the accusations I made against him. In her mind, I'm the villain of this story, the unstable mother-in-law who tried to destroy her marriage with paranoid delusions. But sometimes, when I'm working in my garden and she's getting her mail, I catch her watching me with something that might be sadness, might be regret. Deep down, I think she knows something happened, something that changed Derek from the angry man she married into the devoted father he became. She just can't let herself acknowledge what that something was. The town has mostly forgotten about my episodes, relegating me to the category of harmless eccentric rather than dangerous lunatic. Mrs. Henderson waves at me again when she hangs her laundry, and the mailman stopped looking at me like I might bite him. I started going back to church about a year ago, sitting in the back pew and leaving before anyone could corner me for conversation, but at least I'm there. God and I have had some complicated conversations over the years about what I did and why I did it, and I think we've reached an understanding. Harold's shotgun is back in the bedroom closet, cleaned and oiled but unused. Sometimes I take it out and hold it, remembering that night when I became someone I never thought I could be. I don't regret pulling it on Derek, don't regret threatening to kill him if he hurt Emma again. But I do regret that it came to that, regret that a civilized society couldn't protect one small child from the monster living in her own home. Emma sends me cards sometimes, birthday cards, Christmas cards, little notes that she leaves in my mailbox when no one's looking. She signs them "Your granddaughter who loves you," and each one is a reminder that the choice I made, the price I paid, the woman I became, it was all worth it. She's graduating 8th grade next month, and I won't be there to watch her walk across that stage. But I'll be watching from my kitchen window as she gets ready that morning, and I'll be proud of the strong, confident young woman she's become. That's enough. That has to be enough. So that's my story, the one I've never told anyone until today. The story of how a 72-year-old grandmother became someone she never thought she could be, did something she never thought she could do, and paid a price she never thought she could bear. People in this town still whisper about me sometimes, still think I lost my mind after Harold died, still believe that poor Derek had to deal with a crazy mother-in-law who made terrible accusations. Let them think that. Let them believe whatever version of events helps them sleep at night. The truth is messier, darker, more complicated than most people want to acknowledge. The truth is that sometimes the system fails, sometimes good people do nothing, and sometimes the only thing standing between a child and a monster is one person willing to become a monster themselves. I'm not proud of what I did that night at Miller's Pond. I'm not proud that I threatened to kill a man, that I held a loaded shotgun to someone's chest and meant every word I said. But I'm not ashamed of it either. I'm not ashamed that I chose my granddaughter's safety over my own reputation, her future over my present, her peace over my peace. Emma is 15 now, a beautiful young woman who laughs easily and walks with confidence and has never known another moment of fear in her own home. She's everything a child should be allowed to be: safe, loved, protected. And if the price for that was becoming the villain in everyone else's story, then it was a price worth paying. They say that blood is thicker than water, but I learned something different. Love is thicker than blood, thicker than law, thicker than what's right and what's wrong. Love will make you do things you never imagined, become someone you never thought you could be. And sometimes, when you love someone enough, becoming the monster is the only way to defeat the monsters. If this story touched something in your heart, if you understand what it means to love someone so much you'd sacrifice everything to protect them, leave me a comment below. Share this with someone who needs to hear it, someone who might be fighting their own monsters. And don't forget to subscribe, because every grandmother has stories.